Morning.
Good morning.
Morning, guys.
Morning.
Good morning, Commissioners. Jim Richardson, Division Chief for Fire Rescue EMS, Department of Public Safety. I'd like to dispense with reading the memo and go ahead and turn it over to my colleagues to begin the presentation, if that's okay.
Certainly. Morning, gentlemen. You want to introduce
Morning.
yourselves and
Good morning, Commissioners. My name is Monty Parks, Operations Specialist for the Department of Public Safety Fire Rescue EMS Division. With me today is
We're just gonna move your mic down just so people on YouTube can hear.
Mikey Clark, Assistant Chief with the Huntingtown Volunteer Fire Department and Rescue Squad. He's also Chairman of the Calvert County Chiefs Council. Brent Langford, Chief of the St. Leonard Volunteer Fire Department and Rescue Squad, and Mike Farrell, firefighter EMT with Huntingtown Volunteer Fire Department and Rescue Squad. First, I'd like to thank you for showing an interest in these lithium-ion batteries. And by the end of this work session, we hope you have a better understanding of the batteries as well as the dangers that come along with them.
With that, I'll turn it over to Michael.
Good morning. Nice to be here today with you guys. My name is Mike Farrell with the Huntingtown Volunteer Fire Department, and I'm just going to walk you through a pretty comprehensive understanding of lithium-ion batteries, where they came from, where they're at in our community, and what kind of risks that it poses. It is a fairly consolidated report. Certainly, if you want additional time and more information on this, we can certainly provide that for you. In the air. Oh. So some of the things we'll be going over this morning is just to explain some of the general understandings of the rechargeable lithium-ion battery. We'll determine some of the sequence events where this actually becomes an emergency. We'll present some operational procedures. Chief Langford will be taking you through how the fire department will respond in there to these lithium-ion batteries and some of the challenges that presents itself to the fire department. And then certainly illustrate going forward, what do we need to manage this risk in Calvert County. So the first thing I want to take you through is why use lithium-ion batteries. So everything I have here is basically compared against your sulfuric acid battery, your car battery, that has been an energy storage system up to this point. Just a little bit of history, the lithium-ion battery was actually created back in 1985. And it was actually in production in 1991 by the Sony company. Through some technological advancements and things like that, it does last longer. It will provide an energy source for a longer period of time compared to that sulfur or sulfuric acid battery. It has a higher power density, which means it provides more energy for whatever it's trying to operate. And then certainly has a longer life expectancy, and it has a lighter package, so it actually subtracts a lot of that added weight to that device that you're trying to push, pull, or power to. So when we get into the actual emergency, it's very important to understand how this battery works. So I'm going to kind of break this down very simplistic for you. It's just a general lithium-ion rechargeable cell. And you have an anode and a cathode, and that's how that energy is actually passing those lithium-ion particles through that electrolyte, which is in the middle of that picture. That electrolyte is what's causing the problem. In the middle of that electrolyte, you have a separator, and that separator's job is to keep that cathode and ion separated, but it also stabilizes that battery. And if that separator becomes compromised, or what we call battery insult, which I will give you some demonstrations of exactly what battery insult is, it's causing these problems. When that separator starts to fail, that's when the battery starts to become unstable, and that's when we can actually have an emergency. Also, the understanding that that electrolyte is actually a liquid material, and that liquid material is a hydrocarbon base, which means it is flammable. So when that starts to heat up, that liquid will actually yield a gas, which is a flammable, highly toxic gas, and that's what's igniting, that's what's causing the emergency. And that as that burns, that liquid continues to convert to a gas, which continues to feed the fire. When we look at this, and I'll show you how these individual cells are packed inside there, these modules have several of these cells inside them. And here's just some of the examples of the different technology that is being used in the commercial industry. I'll just kind of start up at the top right corner there, that prismatic. You've probably seen this in your rechargeable, your cameras and things like that. If you ever have to actually pop that out and put it in a charger, it's fairly small, hard in shape. And what they're doing is they're actually wrapping that lithium-ion technology inside there nice and tight. Then at the bottom right corner, you have the pouch. That's very common in a lot of your electronics, very thin. These are actually used a great deal in cell phones, your laptops, things like that. But as technology is advancing, this lithium-ion technology is yielding where they're actually using these pouch concept in a lot of your much larger apparatus, vehicles, things like that. They're seeing pouch technology. And then, of course, your button cell itself. The button cell, very common in a lot of your medical equipment, things like that, pacemakers. You'd find these in key fobs, or electronic key starts like we have for keyless vehicles, things like that. And then finally, I take you to the top left corner, which is a cylindrical. Very similar to, a little bit bigger than a AA battery is what you would see. And then again, they're all made primarily the same. It's the same technology. It's really in the packaging that separates those different examples. So let's take a look at it. Those cells, when you put them together, they form a module. Now that module typically will then be put into a pack, which then will be put into a device. For example, like a vehicle or a energy storage system and things like that. There will be packs in there, again, breaking in there. The module itself, which is interesting, is because there's such a need and demand of this, that's where the value is, and that's where the dollar amount is. So there's a lot of companies that are building these, maybe not as safe, a lot of aftermarket products and things like that. So there's an actual electronic module on that battery module that prevents it from being overcharged, undercharged, things like that. So you can get a lot of these aftermarkets that are out there for consumption. You can actually get a minute where they'll actually, to save money, remove that modular off. So now it is unsafe, but it's being sold as a commodity for people to use, and people think they're saving money, you know, because there is a lot of cost associated to this. This kind of technology actually had a lot of, it wasn't as attractive because back in the early 90s, even the early 2000s, if your pack went down, you had to replace the whole pack. Well, now they're actually finding with the technological advancements, they can go in there and test the individual cells and subtract those cells out of that module, replace those, and put those right back into place.
So, sir, let me ask you, is there any way the consumer would know they're purchasing that product? Is it marked?
Chances are no. Chances are no.
And I'm
So it's kind of
assuming-
buyer beware.
And I'm assuming with this technology being so fast, as typical government's way behind the curve, so there's no
Yes, sir. Yeah, there is.
maybe regulations on.
There is a lot of regulation, and if you look at some of the regulations, you'll see it's subpart A, subpart B, subpart C. So as they're finding these issues and they're trying to address them, you can see that they're well behind the power curve based on that supply and demand need. So, let me go back one. All right, so first day on the job. So here we have just some examples of where is this at in our community. I mean, I get it. Here in Calvert County, I just broke them down into transportation, energy storage, and an expanding market of consumer electronic devices and things. So if we look in the top left corner, golf carts, buses for public transportation, your wheelchairs, even your e-bikes. That electronic bike actually will assist in moving that vehicle and things. And we're seeing this more in urban environments where you're seeing the bike sharing program and things like that. Certainly you could see that kind of, and people can buy those right off the market themselves and have that in their homes. The energy storage, so energy storage is becoming a very, very big market. And the concept is instead of using a combustible engine like a diesel generator, things like that, you actually are using the power grid to charge these batteries up. And then when there is a power failure of domestic power, these things click right on with no or any change in power to that area. We actually are seeing these. They're starting out in the West Coast, and they're starting to migrate this way. So these new developments are being constructed. One of the attractive ways to move with this builder is that they will have an energy storage system for that community. And they're very similar to about a sea container. And there'll be individual modular packs of these lithium-ion batteries that just sit in there, and they'll usually plant like trees and stuff, so it's camouflaged. It's not an eyesore. So if any power is lost to that community, these things automatically kick right on. And you may not even realize that that's what's inside that container, is this energy storage system. Currently, there is no federal legislation, to my knowledge, that I was able to find, where there's a required extinguishing system integrated into there. So you have to be very aware through pre-planning and things like that, that they're in your community, and then and then how we would extinguish them. There was a very serious incident I can take you through in great detail at another time if you're interested, in Sunrise, Arizona, where one actually detonated and several firefighters were severely injured from that emergency. And then the expanding market, and this is where we're seeing a lot of this, where you're seeing your wearable, your iWatches, your Apple Watches, things like that, your Fitbits, smartphones, the lithium-ion rechargeable batteries, probably in everyone's pocket. These consumer commodities, I would be very safe to say there's probably thousands of them just in the buildings right now, in these Cabot County buildings, from cell phones to laptops to anything you could imagine. Toys are becoming more and more prevalent. I'm sure everyone saw the hoverboard and things like that, the e-bikes. They're moving up into more like a moped, if you will, kind of size, or scooter size, where we're seeing more and more of these. The cordless phone, and then, of course, the power tool. I'm sure all of us have lithium-ion rechargeable drills and saws and weed eaters and all that stuff plugged in probably right now, waiting to be used when we need them. And what I want to show you is to understand how these things are actually going to cause us problems, and that's where we move into thermal runaway. So this is what we call battery insult, and battery insult is basically something has caused some kind of physical stress to that battery. Again, like I stated earlier, that separator becomes compromised, and that electrolyte starts to heat up, and that cell that you see in the top left corner, one cell starts to actually heat up, and actually that flammable hydrocarbon electrolyte will catch fire, and then that cell will catch fire. Well, those cells are packed in there very, very tight. So once one goes off, the next one will go off, and so on and so forth, to where you have a module and then actually the entire pack. And that's where you're seeing that propagation, where it's continuing to burn out of control. So once one heats up and that temperature starts to rise and starts to release that flammable and toxic gas, it's going to ignite and continue, so on and so forth. Just to give you an understanding of what that kind of looks like here, I was able to pull down some numbers for you just to put in contrast here. So what are you talking about? How fast is this occurring? So you're looking at a scientific study that was conducted, and they did this several times to get an average. And you're looking at about 0 to 5 seconds, one cell will actually go into thermal runaway once it actually has that separator compromised. At 5 to 20 seconds, now 6 cells are in thermal runaway. And then at 40 seconds, 18 cells are now in thermal runaway. So you can see how exponentially this small incident starts to expand itself. And as these things begin thermal runaway, when you see that propagation up there, the temperatures that are coming off this is 1,000 degrees. So sheet metal will actually fail at 600 degrees, and steel starts to elongate at 1,000 degrees. So this is very, very high temperature coming off here. So if this is around any kind of combustible materials, you can now see how you have rapid flame spread. So what I have here is hopefully this will come up. I have a video here, and this is with a thermal imager, so that's why you see those different colors. And of course, the brighter the color, the hotter it is. And they're actually going to take this battery pack and put it into thermal runaway, and you're going to see how this thing is going to start yielding heat, and it's going to start throwing heated shrapnel and stuff like that. And that's the thing to be in mind, is that when this actually starts to go into thermal runaway, it starts to fragment, and it will actually propel heated cells away from the source. Again, so if it throws it across this room, anywhere it comes in contact, that 1,000 degrees is going to start to ignite that combustion.
Simple hearing hack anyone can use to improve their hearing almost overnight.
Wrong video.
There we go. So they're actually causing this into thermal runaway, and you can see how violent this is. And all that you see coming off there is heated materials. So Chief Langford's going to kind of take you through step by step from the fire department side, but I just really want to focus again, like we talked about the temperatures itself, but also some of the toxic gases that are yielded from this. Hydrogen, highly flammable gas coming off this, carbon dioxide, carbon monoxide, even some of your acidic gases and things like that you could actually find out there.
Sir, do they have stats on how often these are failing? I remember there was talk on planes with this stuff, and then I
Yes.
remember we had a thing at work where one of our computers wasn't working. Of course, young guys know about all this stuff. He's like, you got to unplug it. Like, what do you mean? He goes, it's heating up. I'm like, what do you mean it's heating up? We actually had this battery backup that came with it, so that it went down, it kicked on this. He's like, unplug it. By tomorrow morning, it should cool down. And so is there?
So statistically, no. There's nothing where, the reality is that there are trillions of these being used throughout the world. It's just becoming more prevalent, and because of that supply and demand, you're finding producers that are being able to make these battery packs for a lower cost and start cutting corners, and I think that's where you're finding a lot of that causing issues. These batteries are being discharged and recharged every day.
Oh.
The problem is it may
Right now?
be. Yes, sir, 100%.
Right now?
I have one in my pocket, so I'm with you. But the reality is that they are infrequent, but when they do occur, they are highly volatile and cause a tremendous amount of risk to that.
Excuse me, so within a home, and the chart that you had with everything that contains these battery packs, batteries, it can really help to ignite a fire and have it spread from room to room.
That is correct, ma'am. So there was a fire just recently in New York City where there were 38 people that are displaced from an apartment building. And that's a huge concern for us, because a lot of times where these things are being charged is right at the front door. So if I have my e-scooter and I ride it around and I bring it in, typically I don't want to drag it all the way through the house because the tires are dirty, things like that. So I plug it right in by the front door. And then this battery pack goes into thermal runaway because it's been battery insult, whatever. And now when it starts to do that process we just saw, it's right by my means of egress to get out of the structure. And now I've actually compromised the entire structure, so all the other people that are occupied in that building. Brett?
Morning.
Morning.
Brent Langford, Chief St. Leonard Volunteer Fire Department. See if we can operate this. Backwards. So first and foremost, the fire department will always operate in a fundamental system. Regardless of the emergency, the units will arrive on the scene of the emergency and immediately conduct life safety or life-saving operations to control, confine, eliminate, and mitigate the threat to life, property, and the environment. So prior to an actual emergency being dispatched, there's a proactive approach to a lot of these things. First and foremost, as Mike had mentioned, pre-planning. So the first thing that we normally do as chiefs in the county is create standard operating guidelines to standardize a response throughout the county. That way, if there is a response, whether in Huntingtown, St. Leonard, anywhere in between or otherwise, that we understand what we're, not only we're responding to, but what resources are coming. We also plan on, suggest that we start working with the portions of the Calvert County government to identify the target hazards that we currently have here in the county and what could be potentially coming in the future. So I'll be working with like waste management to see where they store their, the items down at the landfill or at the other waste facilities throughout the county, how they're storing it, are they all together, as well as working with emergency communications to talk about when they get notification that there might be involving a battery fire, that they let us know either through the CAD messaging or when we're dispatched for a call. And then we're working as well to talk with planning and zoning to see if there's anything that they're notified if someone's installing maybe battery packs into the house or a charging port for like a Tesla or another vehicle. Not sure the answer to that right now, but as the vehicles get bigger, they might require more, battery draw, start going to tractors or, other vehicles. The next proactive approach would be with education and training. So what we want to focus on is a standardized, repeatable approach to training to ensure that all the responders receive the same type of training. This has already started in Calvert County. Huntingtown Fire Department hosted a 8-hour lithium-ion battery emergency training March 25th that all departments were invited to. And then we also have vendor-specific training. So those would be such as Tesla being a one vendor out there for cars, or if there's other vendors that come out, you would get that vendor-specific training. At St. Leonard, we hosted a vehicle vendor-specific training on February 25th. And then the other big thing, as Mike alluded to, would be education of the public at our open houses, education at community events, to talk about, as these devices become more prevalent, where you should charge them, how you should charge them, and safety if there is an emergency prior to the fire department getting there. And then the last thing in the proactive approach would be equipment procurement. That would be where each fire department or the fire department together conduct market research on relevant equipment that may be implemented into the fire and rescue operations. There's a couple devices out there right now. Now, obviously, the market is getting bigger every year. So, and as there's more money in the market, you have people who develop other fire suppression systems. And this will change from year to year as the market becomes a bigger cost. Then we'll get into the response aspect of it. So as I alluded to before, our primary goal is life safety. We arrive on the scene. If there's any life safety, that's our first goal. Then second is going to be containing the situation, and that will be dependent on what's involved. You guys spoke about on an airplane where they actually have, looks like what you get your pizzas warmed up in, a container where you would throw an iPad or a phone in there, and that'd be something very simple that you could mitigate that situation almost immediately. We start getting to the bigger vehicles, it becomes difficult, or bigger batteries, it becomes very difficult. And then that leads us to how we're going to extinguish those bigger things. Because it's a battery fire, there's no risk for electrocution. So water is the best way to extinguish these fires. The problem is how much water it's going to take to put the fire out and get to where the battery is, because they are contained, as Mike said, and get in there and make sure that the fire is completely put out. There's been situations where fires have reignited hours and days after the fire departments have determined that they've been put out, as well as sometimes it takes thousands of gallons of water. And could be a prolonged situation where if you have a Tesla fire on a highway, there could be roads shut down for 3 or 4 hours. And then after the situation's mitigated, we need to worry about overhaul and disposal of what was on fire. So if you have a vehicle, for example, and it's on fire, there's a potential, again, that it could catch fire hours or days later. So we need to work with the sheriff's department as well as the tow companies to make sure that regardless if the vehicle was even on fire, if it was involved in the accident, there's a potential for the puncture to the battery, that they need to store these vehicles and batteries away from anything other that could catch fire, would be other vehicles or buildings.
Chief, could you walk us through talking about the response? You get a 911 call, the car is on fire inside the garage.
Yes, sir.
How you mitigate this, keep your people safe? Can you kind of walk us through what would happen?
Sure. So at this point in time, it would be dispatched as a garage fire, and hopefully working with the control center, we can get them to start asking those questions if they have any potential battery involvement with it, whether it just be a car or anything else. People tend to put their tools in their garage and the other batteries that Mike had alluded to earlier. One of the things with putting the fire out in this situation is, like I said, getting to it. So if let's say, for example, that the car caught on fire, a lot of times when these vehicles catch on fire, it's not just the battery on fire, it's the other material. So you got the car seats, anything in the vehicle that was on fire. And the situation you mentioned, it would be things in the garage on fire. So, anything else that would be involved in there. Once we would obviously be on what we call our self-contained breathing apparatus, which would keep us safe and provide us with fresh air. And we would go in and put the fire out depending on if it was attached garage or detached garage.
Say it's enclosed. I mean, do you have the equipment to get that car out of there so the whole house doesn't, because that could be.
So the biggest thing would be to start putting the fire out. Now, one of the nice things is that it's difficult to get to the battery, but putting out the things that the battery is caught on fire is relatively easy to do. The prolonged period is, we do have the ability to use winches, other things to remove a car, or even get a tow company or something that could come down and possibly do it for us, as we are using the water to make sure that the vehicle stays cool. The biggest thing is to put out the fire itself. And again, it might not just be the car on fire, it could be other elements. And then once the fire is actually out, getting to the battery itself and getting into those cells. That's what's going to take the most amount of time. So once the fire's out, we probably would be able to knock all visible fire down. And then now we need to worry about just making sure that the vehicle itself stays cool. So it wouldn't be necessarily putting a lot of fire out. It would be the prolonged aspect of getting into the battery pack, keeping it cool until our thermal imagers show that there's no longer any heat source that we can see that there's going to be any more danger.
So if I'm watching this at home, I go, okay, they show up, they dump some water on it, blah, blah, blah. How much water? How long? Because I hear nightmare stories about these things that it's not, do you even carry enough water in the truck to put this thing out?
So there is a device called the BEST device that is manufactured by Rosenbauer that will allow you to go in. It's kind of like a Ghostbusters when they slide it out and attract the ghosts, but you slide this under the car, there punctures the battery, and then floods the battery cell with water.
Do we have those things?
We have, St. Leonard's put in for a special project to get one of those after July 1 when the new budget is approved. So we potentially will have one that could be used throughout the entire county after July 1 of this year. It's not 100% effective because if you can't get to the exact cell that's on fire, or if the cells don't overlap, it might take several punctures, but that will decrease the amount of water that's needed. But on a first initial alarm, what is being dispatched is you have upwards of 12,000 gallons of water that will be coming to the scene, which is
Is that enough?
which is a very good start. It's hard to say.
Start.
It's hard to say what will be enough because every fire and every emergency is different. Depends on the size house, what's on fire, how big the vehicle is, how long it's been burning for, et cetera. And like I said, so if the homeowner calls right away and it's right down the street from one of the fire stations and we get there right away, we might be able to mitigate that situation very quickly and put out what is visibly on fire. But then again, it's getting the hidden fire within the battery itself. If it's a prolonged response because so the neighbor notices the garage on fire, then a lot of that water is going to be to put out what was on fire when we arrived, not just cooling down and seeking the hidden fire within the battery itself. So each situation, it's hard to tell how much water we'll need, but we have a good start when getting there.
And you don't always know what you're walking into with these batteries. And also, I understand the puncture, but does that let off harmful gases that is harmful to our firefighters? I mean, when it's burning or gases going around that you all could possibly get sick from?
Yes, ma'am. There's the potential for those gases. Now, I will say that every fire you go to, which involves smoke or what we call an IDLH environment, there is potential to be exposed to dangerous gases. But our breathing apparatus, it's a positive pressure system. We do fit testing every year to make sure that our mask of the firefighters fit correctly. Will help prevent us being exposed to those gases, provided that we're wearing the breathing apparatus the entire time. And in situations like these, because a lot of those gases, after the smoke is gone, you can't see it, we'll be doing metering to make sure that if we are in an enclosed environment, that those gases aren't present, and we might have to wear those breathing apparatus for an extended period of time.
So what about, because Commissioner Gross has got a great point, what about they're in a cul-de-sac and it goes on all the people there, do they have to evacuate?
It's potential, like anything that would involve a hazmat situation would depend on the weather, the wind. I'll give you another example. There's electronic vehicle charger or electronic vehicles can be in a parking garage in North Beach. That's an enclosed environment. I mean, you're potentially, not only just a garage, which might be smaller, but you have the ability to have these affect more than one vehicle or multiple people within an enclosed environment, citizens, not just the fire department.
So you did say you're working with planning and zoning on fire marshal, building codes
So
for the charging stations?
Yes, sir. So basically, after we were sort of charged with this project, it really opened our eyes to kind of the resources we want to get into to start talking to the people to see if they can give us, planning and zoning or, I'll let Monty speak to this.
Commissioners, I actually reached out to inspection and permits and had a discussion with Joe. And he's working on something that's going to be very helpful to the fire departments in Calvert County. There's been a significant increase in permits and electrical for these high voltage plugs for these EV vehicles in garages. He's going to get that information so that can be sent out to the department. So them responding to a fire at that house, they would then have something in front of them showing that they have a plug that could possibly have an EV vehicle in that garage. So, again, with you guys sparking this, we've reached out, and that's in the works right now. So that'll be most helpful to the departments when we run these emergencies at houses.
And Monty, on these storage units for these solar farms, is there any distance that they have to be away from building restriction lines and other houses? And is that something we can put in planning and zoning ordinances to?
That would be a better question for inspection and permits, Commissioner. I'm not sure if there's any codes on that.
On that, county attorney, didn't we have that discussion when the state of Maryland, can you further some light about solar farms and what county's rights are?
John Norris, County Attorney. Commissioner, there was legislation proposed in Annapolis this year that would have superseded any zoning regulation for a community generating size facility that got Public Service Commission approval. That bill, through the efforts of the Maryland Association of Counties and its county partners, was modified so that there is some recognition of the importance of following a comprehensive plan. But the trend is towards pushing solar into the rural communities to feed back into the urban areas and to do rooftop solar in urban areas.
So the law says that we can't stop them, but how much leverage do we have to put in safety guidelines to prohibit them from where they might be installed in relation to residential developments or?
So almost none, because most of that
what I
field is
thought.
preempted. You do have some, today, you do have some authority to amend your residential building code, your international building code, and your local electrical code. But that's dwindling as well.
So the only thing we could do is restrict future development surrounding a facility that might prevent significant danger concerns, but we can't prohibit the site from locating itself near those types of areas, correct?
For a community generating size facility, that's correct. But you also saw this year a bill that proposed when you're doing renovations to townhomes that there be a requirement that the renovation include street side recharging stations.
So I think that what triggered this discussion today was last year at Mako, we had a presentation about mainly solar farms and the battery packs. And it was pretty enlightening to us, the dangers that are involved in those. And because of state legislation, there's not one thing we can do. And that triggered, at least I have a little bit of fire experience. And for you, knowledge of the scene before you arrive is extremely important. And I was concerned about you rolling up on a residence with an electric car in the garage, and maybe the fire hasn't extended into the garage yet, but you knowing that that car is there is important. And there's more and more solar rooftop being installed, and some of those have battery backups, and you need to know that. So I think that my first concern was what we can do to help you as far as signage or, something so that you know when you roll up, there's a battery pack on the roof or in the backyard, or there's 2 Teslas in the garage, so that you have that information to make decisions on. So I think that was the path I was heading down, that working together, we figure out what we can do through planning and zoning, for regulations, for construction, and signage to make sure you're aware of what you've got to deal with. Because we had a little discussion this morning. When you buy a Tesla, they're not telling you what this thing can do to you. Recently, there was a house fire in Virginia, was ignited by an electric bike. That gentleman had no idea when he parked his bike in his living room, it's going to burn his house down. So we need to help you with your public awareness of, and we're not trying to stop people from buying electric cars or electric bikes. We just want to make sure the public's aware that when you place these devices, because, a laptop can set a fire, but as these batteries get bigger and bigger, the danger becomes exponential. and that we want to make sure our citizens are aware of things they shouldn't do, like I said, and whatever we can do to help you so that you're aware of what's out there.
Mr. President, I think if it's possible, if we could get a work session, maybe county administrator could find us some expert from the state to speak to these solar farms, because, you know, obviously the rural areas, we always take the brunt of the decisions get made in 3 jurisdictions and the other 21 are supposed to follow suit. But we get it all. And if we have no say, then at least our citizens should have every piece of information that, will you destroy your property forever? Will you take a chance of harming your neighbors, everyone else? I mean, the verbiage that we're hearing is pretty scary. And so maybe we could get somebody from the state to actually come here. They're the ones that are pushing this out there, then maybe they can defend it and tell us why it's such a good idea. I think it would be fair to our people.
In our presentation at Mako, they talked about these solar farms and these batteries, as you showed, and sea containers full of these batteries. And, because I do have a little bit of experience, they compared it to a nuclear facility where you can't put it out, and your job is to evacuate everybody downwind as far as you think you should because of toxins in that smoke. And I had no idea until I heard that presentation. So that's why we're here today. And today's the first step. You know, your work's not done today, neither is ours. We may have more questions, but I don't want to conclude. But
No, they also talked about submergent tanks for vehicles and the costs associated with them and how you would go about implementing that as well. I guess that's something that the fire side's already looked at, I'm sure.
Are you talking about like getting a container and actually putting the vehicle in there? Yeah, when we were doing our research, we had talked about, you know, sort of the best way, and that's something that they're doing in Europe a lot right now, is just getting, you know, those containers submerging in there, and that would be very time intensive and resource tax in
Absolutely.
order to have down here in Calvert County
But,
at this point.
but if we're going to be all electric
Well, I
in
was gonna
10
say,
years, you know, by the time the old combustion cars are gone, there's going to be a point in time where every car or vehicle running up and down this road is electric, and it's going to be a necessity for us. Maybe not every department has one, but that we have some available, because you can't put them out. And if they're going to trucks, you know, if I've got a truck, you know, you think a Tesla is bad.
What's a school bus?
What's my a tractor trailer? How big a battery is that thing gonna have to have? And it's running up and down the road every day, or tractors or bulldozers or whatever. So it's a minor problem now, but it's gonna be exponentially in the next 20 years.
And
a
hopefully,
significant
as
issue.
the popularity is forced to grow, that the extinguishing and the technology for that might not be on pace, but it'll be not too far behind it in order to determine how to, you know, best extinguish the vehicles.
And things that are gonna change, technology's gonna change. By the time we get there, there may be better equipment or preventive measures that you all can take to use to extinguish these things. But, you know, based on what we know today, trying to think ahead, it's something that we have to prepare for and adapt.
You know, it would be my recommendation, as I was doing research on this, these energy storage systems that you're speaking of, they seem like they have a very good handle on that situation. They're usually pretty segregated from any kind of occupancy area. Some of them have integrated extinguishing systems. They're sealed up airtight. So if you would move in on it, you can really slow it down, just like Chief Langford was saying. Our first priority is life safety. If there's nobody in there, then let's just slow down. Now it's a property incident where we have to be concerned about, the economical impact of that. The bigger concern is when you see that slide where I broke it down into consumable products, that's the concern. That's the concern because you can now buy cheaper lithium-ion battery packs that have basically they don't have all the safety incorporated into it, hence why it's cheaper. And now you're putting it into an apartment building, or you're putting it into a townhouse. And now instead of just one townhouse, these things are getting so violently and so out of control that now we have multiple structures involved.
You bring up a good point. So somebody's doing their work from home on their computer, and this thing's getting hot, and it starts to go, what do? Because they're going to be so caught off guard. I mean, you just don't think of your computer exploding. Or,
I can, and YouTube is a great resource for
do they
this.
throw it in the sink and
That-
turn water
so
on it?
in most cases, they would suggest that you do that, but the problem is, sir, is that what it does is you'll hear a pop, and that is a safety relief where it's actually releasing that electrolyte has gone from a liquid to a gas. It's pressurized and you'll hear a pop. The next thing is you will see a white smoke, but that's actually a toxic flammable gas. The heat is already there. So seconds later, just like when I broke that timeline down to you, it is ignition at 1,000 degrees.
So it's like a
And now
time
they're all
bomb.
starting to go. So in some cases, it's best to get out. And that's where Chief
Really?
Langford, yeah.
So you don't even have time to throw it out the window?
No, it's best to get out of the structure, because whatever's happening, the normal citizen in Calvert County is not gonna stop
Is there
that.
any warning signs?
That's what I'm saying, it's heat. If you
Oh,
touch it,
really?
you're like, that's hot, but once you have that pop, that hiss, that discharge of that white, again, it's smoke, but again, I wanna emphasize that it's flammable gas and toxic gas that is coming out, so it's already there, it's just looking for that ignition, and when it lights, it's very, very violent. There's not much
As
they can do.
things blow out of it?
100%. It will actually throw batteries, will actually, so the vehicles, not to get, because I know time is very precious, I want to be on it, be respectful of that with you today, but they actually pack them in an epoxy material on the vehicle so they can take a little bit more of that insult, but when it explodes, it will actually discharge those like shrapnel, but they're 1,000 degrees. So now they're going under the cars, they're hitting other combustibles, and now you think you're dealing with one vehicle, but now you have all these other things that are igniting as well. So again, my focus for a risk management standpoint wouldn't necessarily be the energy storage systems. I think it would be more the consumer-based in a multi-occupied dwelling, an apartment building, our townhouses that are all from the north to the south in the county. Those things can be becoming very difficult.
And warmth is about the only sign, so if you're grabbing your phone or
Yeah,
something, you
that's correct,
feel-
sir. Yep.
you unplug it, and
100%.
it should cool down if working properly.
Right,
type
and that's where that module that I spoke about was integrated in there with a more expensive material. They're actually going to have that on there to disable that, to prevent that incident from occurring, going into thermal runaway. But if I have a cheaper product, I'm not going to put that module on there, and you're not going to know that. Because again,
Right.
we're all, mindful of our money. If I think I can get it $200 cheaper from
You're gonna do it.
overseas
Oh,
or whatever,
absolutely,
100%.
absolutely.
And you may not know, you may think it's a good deal, but you're actually bringing that risk right into your own home.
Wow.
How about the grant side to it?
Sir?
The grant side,
As far as?
do you see more grants coming down the line for this kind of fire rescue, disposal?
I don't necessarily have an answer to that. We can ask Barbara Warner, who's the grant writer for public safety, if she's seen anything, but I do imagine as it becomes more popular, there will be definitely higher price extinguishing items or ways to mitigate the situation, and that the grants would, if you can justify the need for them, then they will be there.
Okay. And what about the North Beach incident? Did we learn anything from that, or do we know what the conclusion of that was, or?
I'll have to ask Chief Clark on that. I wasn't responding on that call. I'm assuming referring to the one that.
yourself.
What is that you're talking about?
I'm Mike Clark, I'm the Assistant Chief of the Huntingtown Fire Department. Which incident are you talking about?
For the
Public Works
electrical
building?
vehicle, yes.
It was a lawn maintenance vehicle, I believe, and it was
Yes.
left on charge, so it's just a overcharged vehicle. And it did spark a fire at the Milwaukee Avenue storage facility.
Okay.
But State Fire Marshal was investigating further, I do not know anything more than that.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, sir.
Well, I think that, unfortunately, if you thought your work was done, it's not, and I don't think you thought that. But what we would ask is that you continue to work with county staff and whoever you need to bring into that discussion, and as you identify issues, things that we can help you with, that we're here to do that. Communications, signage, whatever you all identify, we want to make sure staff's on board to help you, and we'll work you through that. And I just want to remind the public that's out here watching, Chief Langford and Mr. Farrell and Mr. Parks in his private life, when he's not working for us, are all volunteers. And the presentation that you just watched was put on by our volunteers. And it's why we have such an outstanding volunteer fire service in Calvert County, because I would challenge our staff, that they would put on, a presentation at this level. So I want to thank you, gentlemen, for what you do for our citizens every day. And Chief Clark, who didn't have a lot to say, who's sitting back there. Yeah. But this isn't done, so we'll continue and look forward to anything we can help and assist you with.
Absolutely.
But once again, thank you for a great
Thank you very much.
presentation.
Thank you very much.
Commissioners, as they're packing up, Mark Willis, County Administrator, Mary Beth Cook, Director of Planning and Zoning, is in the room, and one of the reasons that she's here is that when they started putting solar panels on roofs and firefighters had to cut their way into the building, that prompted us to look at what inspections and that we would use, but also here just to learn what they had to say about what we can help them with going forward.
Right, because these chargers that people are installing for their cars are not just your everyday battery charger.
Like you were saying this morning, they don't know.
Yeah.
They don't tell you that at the dealership that, or when the guy's coming to say, this is
Yeah.
good for the environment, it's gonna save you money, you're doing your part to help.
Right. So we've got to make sure our codes are in place to make sure they're installed properly. And I know people hate rules and regulations, but we're trying to save your life. So,
Well,
something we have to
I'm
do.
even thinking about what's in our garage, you know?
Makes you think.
Even things
Absolutely.
Plugged in. Wow.
Yeah.
Because those battery packs are like this for the weed whackers and
Right. That's right.
chainsaw and all of that.
Riding lawnmowers now, electric, so, you know, we're not trying